Welcome to the original Gangsters Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Burnstein. We are going to do a historical breakdown of New Jersey's Lucchese mob crew that is in the news right now, and I want to first touch on what's happened in the last couple days. But I want the real meat on the bone of this podcast to be a deep dive into the history of the Lucchese crime family's Jersey faction, which is just a very compelling tale, very Shakespearean, lots of twists and turns, lots of soap opera like drama, lots of bloodlines, lots of bloodlust. So we'll get into that in a moment. But as most mob watchers know, big bust this week out of New Jersey. About 40 guys were indicted by New Jersey state officials in a state racketeering gambling case, with the number one defendant in the case being the Lucchese's mob boss in waiting / street boss / soon to be acting boss, soon to be Don, Georgie Neck Zappola. And Georgie Neck comes from Red Bank, New Jersey, and for a short period of time had control of the Jersey faction himself until he was promoted back to his original Brooklyn crew, and has over the last couple of years has been being phased into day-to-day leadership. He's been tapped by longtime Godfather Vic Amuso as his heir apparent, his successor. Georgie Neck Zappola is the next boss of the Lucchese crime family. Right now, he's dealing with a state racketeering case out of New Jersey, which could, in theory, derail his path to the throne, at least temporarily. So Georgie Neck is the number one defendant in the case, but the reputed skipper of the Jersey crew, Lucchese's Jersey crew, Big Joe Perna, is the number two defendant in the case. And then we have a lot of associates, another couple soldiers, but the main shot callers are Georgie Zappola, 65 years old, and Big Joe Perna. And we're going to talk a lot about the Perna family. You can't talk about the Lucchese's Jersey faction without talking about the Pernas, the Chichetas, Tumac Asatoro. These all family members, all related by blood, all cousins, and they have represented the bulk of leadership over the last 50 or so years, and we're going to get into that. But right now, just finish up talking about what happened this week, and these guys are looking, if all things fall in the government's favor and, maximum sentences, they're looking at 20, 25 years. I doubt that will, the sentences will really be that severe at the end of the day, because it's a nonviolent racketeering case, but still could send these guys away. Some of these guys are multi-time convicted felons. They could go away longer. Georgie Zappola did 18 years on a murder racketeering beef between 96 and 2014. It's been out for about a decade. Little Joe Perna, Big Joe Perna's cousin, and I know it's going to get confusing, so everybody get their Venn diagrams out. I'll try to keep the scorecard as clean as possible, trying to explain all these relationships business-wise and lineage-wise. But Little Joe Perna was not one of the 40 or so people arrested in this case. However, according to Dave Schratweiser, Mob Talk Sit Down, Fox Philly 29, he's been, breaking all the news related to this particular bust. And according to Dave, even though Little Joe Perna was not indicted this past Wednesday, he was the target of a search. His property was raided and his phone was confiscated. We're also being told that even though This case dropped on Wednesday, and like I said, over 3 dozen people were indicted. That there are grand juries still convening, both at the state level, possibly at the federal level. Well, we're hearing here at Gangster Report that the feds could be possibly waiting on deck. There's a lot of people in New York City worried right now, specifically because of Georgie Neck. And Georgie Neck is a guy that has, just un, unbridled enthusiasm from the leadership that is tasking him with taking over the family. These guys are incredibly high on Georgie. They feel like he's been being groomed since the '90s. He was a right hand man and top enforcer and trigger man for Gas Pipe Casso and Little Vic Amuso. That leadership group. Well, Little Vic Amuso still in power. Gas Pipe flipped in the '90s, but they're going to play a role in the story that we're about to tell, with about the history of the Jersey Lucchese branch. But I think the common belief right now is that this is not the final shoe to drop, and that there will be more charges possibly coming down the pike. So Little Joe Perna, I know, had an engagement party this past weekend. A lot of the Jersey crew was there. A lot of guys from other crime families representing other parts of the East Coast, other Borgatas, were there as well. Little Joe is, again, very, just like Georgie Neck, very popular, very connected, very capable, and knows a lot of people. And that's one of the reasons that people in New York are worried about Georgie Neck, just because, as the, not worried about him not being a stand-up guy. Nobody's worried about that. I mean, especially with the state gambling case, but worried in the sense that there could be more charges, collateral damage, and Georgie Neck, he, as being the acting boss, street boss right now, he's meeting with all the capos. He's meeting with everybody. He's meeting with everybody from all the other crime families too. Speaking on behalf of Vic Amuso and Big Mike DeSantis and those guys. So let's go back and deep dive this thing. This is another one of these kind of lost storylines. Not lost in the sense that people in New Jersey or people within the Lucchese orbit don't know it. They obviously do. There's a great book written about the trial that we're going to talk about, the Jersey Boys trial, which was the longest criminal trial in American history, and there was a lot of egg on the face of the government, and that, according to a lot of people, if you believe a lot of people that are pro Jersey crew, that created a vendetta that might still last to this very day. 40 years later, after the more than 40 years later, or around 30, 40 years later, after the Jersey Boys case finished up, that there's still a lot of residual animosity. So it's been chronicled, but not to the level that really transcends the area. And this is just, like I said, it's a riveting narrative, and it's tailor made for a film or a premium TV series that you could have on one of the streamers or on HBO. There's such a rich palette to paint from when you're telling this story. So we'll start, and we'll consider this the history of the modern day Lucchese crew. We're not going to go back to Prohibition, but from about World War II forward, this was a regime that was led by Big Sam Accardi. Had that crew for roughly 15, 20 years, based out of Newark. He gets nailed in a drug case, is fighting deportation, and flees the country in 1955, and the crew goes to his number two, Chicago Joe Abate. Joe A. Chicago Joe got the nickname because he was one of Capone's lieutenants in the Windy City during Prohibition, had been born in New York, went to Chicago, ends up planting roots in New Jersey. And he takes over the Lucchese Jersey crew in the 1950s, mid 1950s, and he kind of continues what Big Sam was doing in terms of expansion, but he takes it into overdrive. And a lot of the territory that is under the umbrella of the Lucchese Jersey branch now is territory that was acquired, absorbed, annexed, if you will, by Joe Abate. And Abate was based out of Atlantic City. He had a couple proteges in Anthony Asatoro, aka Tumac, and Vincent Craparata, aka Jimmy Sinatra, that are going to play major roles, but be major characters in this storyline going forward. When you say Tumac Asatoro on the East Coast, he's synonymous with the Lucchese Jersey crew. Before he cut his cooperation deal, he was a legendary figure whose reputation preceded him wherever he went. He was very feared, very respected, and had a lot of power, not just in Jersey and New York, but also down in Florida. So Tumac Asatoro, whose nickname came from I guess an old movie from the 1930s or 40s where there was a kind of a caveman figure, Neanderthal like figure that they called Tumac, and that's how Asatoro got his nickname, because he was a ferocious organized crime figure from a young age. So he handled all of Abate's collections and all of the hits, all of the drugs, all the shylocking, the prostitution, all the blue collar stuff. He got his hands, liked to get his hands dirty. The more white collar part of that crew, the gambling network, which was vast, was controlled by Jimmy Sinatra. Vincent Craparata, who went by the nickname Jimmy Sinatra. He was an amateur, liked to sing, and they nicknamed him Sinatra. And he was a brain, a guy that really understood logistics, gambling logistics and numbers, and made a lot of money for that crew. So you had the Velvet Glove and the Iron Fist working hand in hand under Chicago Joe Abate, and Abate ends up expanding all across North Jersey, Essex, Morris, Monmouth, Bergen, Passaic, Sussex, Union, Ocean, Atlantic counties. They all go under the North Jersey Lucchese's when Abate's in charge for, again, about 15, 20 years, equal to Big Sam Accardi. But he starts to have his own issues with the law and starts to step back a little bit. And by the late 60s, early 70s, Tumac Asatoro is coming to capo status. And he's very close with Tony Ducks Corallo, who eventually is going to become the boss of the Lucchese crime family, which bodes well for Tumac and that crew. And then Tumac brings his whole family, the Pernas, the Chisettas, and there are just seemingly an endless roster of Pernas and Chisettas. And they're the ones that are coming on the scene in the 60s and 70s, and they'll be staples until today. So Tumac leverages his connections to Tony Ducks, becomes a skipper, takes over for his mentor, Chicago Joe Abate. But because he's under so much heat right off the bat, he decides to relocate on a full-time basis down to Florida and run the Lucchese's Jersey operations through his cousins. The Chisettas are the ones that are given the day-to-day control of that family in the 70s. Marty and Mad Dog, they're brothers, and they take control of Jersey on a day-to-day basis for the Lucchese's with their cousin Tumac down in Florida. So things are running like a well-oiled machine, and this group is making a lot of money and gobbling up territory and making connections and kind of in some ways becoming a family within a family. They were bigger than a crew. They were kind of like their own regime. And because they were all related by blood, it bonded them even closer together, or at least it would at the beginning. So when things start to go in the direction of a Quentin Tarantino movie mixed with Days of Our Lives, it's really in the 1980s, and this is when the first crack in the armor in this crew is really revealed, and it's something that will have massive ramifications and lots of ripple effects. And that's an issue that arises with Jimmy Sinatra in around 1983, 1984. Tumac is down in Florida. The Tichettas and Pernas are in Jersey handling things. And Jimmy Sinatra had just got out of prison, and I think in the early 80s, he had done a couple of years on a racketeering case and wanted to step back a little bit. He wasn't as active. I guess he'd be considered semi-active or semi-retired. But he had a couple nephews who were not wise guys, but they were moneymakers. And this is, another one of these cautionary tales, in my opinion, of how quickly you can get kind of sucked into the vortex, even if you have a tangential tie to organized crime. These guys are sharks, and they can smell blood better than anybody, and they start circling fast. So Jimmy Sinatra had two nephews, the Stino brothers, who were running a very profitable video poker machine. And this was in the early 80s, making a lot of money throughout New Jersey, and were ostensibly protected by Jimmy Sinatra. Looking through court documents and police records, it doesn't appear that Jimmy Sinatra was taking that much out of the business. He was kind of letting them run it and keep the lion's share themselves, but nobody was paying tax. Nobody was paying tribute. And Tumac Asatoro and the powers that be in the Lucchese, specifically Tony Ducks Corallo, they want their cut. And they're offended that Jimmy Sinatra had been, in their opinion, holding out on them or running cover for his nephews, who, again, even though they weren't wise guys, they were operating in a regulated wise guy industry, and it was probably naive to think that they could get away without paying any street tax. But Jimmy Sinatra is offended, feels like he has the right to protect his nephews, and if his nephews aren't paying tax to the administration, that's too bad. I mean, that was kind of the approach that Jimmy Sinatra took. Didn't want to pay for his nephews. Didn't want to have his nephews have to pay tax to the Jersey crew or the Borgata's overall administration. And this results in the murder of Jimmy Sinatra in June of 1984. A crew representing the New Jersey Lucchese leadership attacks Jimmy Sinatra at his used car dealership in Toms River, beats him to death with golf clubs. Who was there and who wasn't there is still debated today. There was a case we'll talk about shortly where there was a judge deciding on this just a couple months ago about who should be and who shouldn't be held responsible for Jimmy Sinatra's his brutal homicide. But the situation doesn't end there. And it becomes an entire ordeal between the Lucchese's, the New Jersey crew, and the Philadelphia mob, and who's going to have ownership rights to the Stino brothers. We should say that under Abate, Chicago Joe Abate, and Tumac, there was a lot of ground acquired and taken over and shared with both the Genovese crime family, the Bonanno crime family, in this expansion that Chicago Joe undertook in the 60s, and early 70s, and then also with the Philadelphia mob, the Bruno Scarfo crime family. So the Stino brothers are kind of like up for grabs. And now that their uncle's gone and it's been decided that they have to pay tribute, who do they belong to? And they, understandably, they don't want to have to go belong to the guys that just killed their uncle. They're afraid of these guys. So they run to Philadelphia and try to get protection, first from Joe Sedano and Blackie Napoli, who were Philadelphia Jersey guys, Jersey shot callers. Then to a guy down in Florida, Pinky Costello. Eventually, it makes its way to the bosses of Philly and the bosses of the Lucchese's, Nicky Scarfo, Phil Leonetti, for the Philly group, and then Tony Ducks and his admin, Sammy Black, Christy Tick. And there ends up being like a half dozen sit downs in like 4 or 5 months, from Craparata's murder in June of '84 all the way through the fall. There are sit downs taking place, and both of these crime families jockeying for who's going to take control over the Stino brothers. There's even a sit down again between Scarfo and Dux Corallo in Manhattan, where both administrations met face to face. And I guess at this, according to CIs that were there, Dux Corallo said, "I don't care how this thing gets sorted out, but it better get sorted out now, because if these two guys aren't paying somebody tax next month, I'm going to kill them." That was like a direct quote from Dux Corallo. Eventually, the nod goes to the Jersey Lucchese's, and they take control of the Stino brothers. And there was testimony that Phil Leonetti, the underboss to his uncle Nicky Scarfo, who was the boss of the Philly mob in the '80s, and Leonetti was at the final sit down, and the decision was given, and I guess the Stino brothers like turned ash and white, and one of them might have pissed his pants, like literally, and they almost began cowering in their seat. And Tumac Asatoro, according to Leonetti, just was kind of like sitting there, lighting a cigar and laughing and turning to them, being like, "You were always mine. You were never going to get away from me. You're never going to get away from me. You belonged to me then, and now you belong to me now." It just, again, it shows you how quickly you can get sucked into, in this case, your uncle's business. So that creates an issue in that murder's hanging over their head. It got a lot of attention from the government, from police, from the press. And then basically, within a couple years, the big federal indictment comes down, Operation Jersey Boys, and takes down almost 24. I think it ends up being 21 defendants. Basically, the whole Jersey faction of the Lucchese's gets taken down. Some Philly guys get taken down, and goes to trial between '86 and '88. It's almost a 2-year trial, 22 months, longest trial in American criminal jurisprudence. They made a movie about it, but I think 20 years ago or so. Vin Diesel, Find Me Guilty. He plays Jackie DiNorsio, who was a Philly guy, a Philly soldier operating in New Jersey with the Jersey Lucchese's, and he defended himself at the case. And what you saw in that movie is true. He charmed the jury And at the end of the day, it's acquittals across the board. Summer of 1988, they all get acquitted, and it's a big victory for the mob. It creates, as I said earlier in the broadcast, it created what a lot of people claim to this day is a vendetta, a campaign of retribution by the government against the guys that beat those charges. One specifically being Marty Teixeira. And Marty was convicted in that, or wasn't convicted in that case, rather, but would be convicted in another case in some things that first, at its face, looked like it could be double jeopardy. And then there was some prosecutorial misconduct, some possible doctoring of documents and timelines, perjuring testimony that looks like it could have been perjured and coached. And Marty Teixeira looked like he was going to get out of prison last year. That's not what happened, but again, we'll get into that in a second. So fast forward to the late 1980s, Jersey crew of the Lucchese's beats the government, but there are storms on the horizon, and these storms are internal, both in the sense of within the Jersey crew itself, but also in relation to the business arrangement that existed between the new Lucchese overall leadership, Vic and Gass, who would come in to replace Tony Ducks, who went to prison in the commission case, and Tumac and the Teixeiras and the Pernas. Vic Amuso takes power and looks at what he's got going on in Jersey and thinks, my predecessor was taking it easy on these guys and was lacking true oversight. They were kind of allowed to do their own thing. They only had to pay a one-time annual street tax. And there really wasn't much of a grip on what was going on there from the Lucchese hierarchy. And Vic and Gaspipe wanted to rein that in. Tony Ducks going to prison really hurt Tumac, and it probably plants the seeds for Tumac to cut his cooperation deal. So both you have two separate situations developing at the same time. You have the administration in Brooklyn, all guys that belong to Christy Tick, the former consigliere who went to prison with Tony Ducks, his 19th whole crew, Vic and Gaspipe, and they're taking power, trying to establish themselves. And they're leaning on Tumac and the Teixeiras to start paying more tribute. And it no longer once a year. Now it's once a month, and they're saying they want 50%, half of it. At the same time, you have issues going on between Tumac, his son, Anthony Jr., and his cousins, the Teixeiras and the Pernas. Teixeiras had been acting skippers for almost 20 years. And by the late 80s, early 90s, Tumac wants to pass things off to his son, and Teixeiras think that they should be the ones that are, taking the reins on an official basis. They feel usurped by Anthony Jr., and it's causing a lot of friction. And both are talking to the administration about the other. So it's this cluster, this knot that gets all bunched up. The Teixeiras are going to Vic and Gass and saying, our cousin Tumac is going to go hire a bunch of South American drug lords that he knows, and he's going to bring them up here from Colombia, and they're going to assassinate you. So Tumac gets shelved, and the Teixeiras are given control of the crew, but Tommy Ricciardi, who was another guy that was a big Tumac loyalist and a guy that was doing a lot of Tumac's bidding, muscle work, was allegedly, or not allegedly, he admitted it in court, the captain of the hit team that killed Jimmy Sinatra. And he, according to his own testimony, delivered the death knell to the head while screaming, "You pay your debts, you pay your debts." So the early 90s, you got Asatoro and the Trichetta's beefing. You got Vic and Gaspipe angry at Trichetta and Asatoro. And then you got the Trichettas beefing with Tommy Ricciardi. So again, it's a real mess. And that eventually brings us to one of the most kind of famous, mafia edicts that was ever issued. And people might not know this whole story, but a lot of people can recognize the quote or the edict. And that was the famous Whack Jersey Declaration made by Vic and Gas, early 90s, when they felt that there was no more that they could do to get resolution, to get the Jersey crew to start kicking up more. They put a murder contract on the entire crew's head, and the Trichettas and Asatoro and Tommy Ricciardi, they all had to go underground and kind of live underground for a year to 2 years before a big state indictment comes and takes them down in 92. They're ducking their own admin trying to kill them. Eventually, Tommy Ricciardi and Tumac cut deals. Trichettas are the ones left holding the bag, and they're all convicted in a state racketeering case that charges the Jimmy Sinatra case, which they have been acquitted of federally, but it's charged as a predicate act in the state case. So Marty and Mad Dog Trichetta are both convicted there. And you kind of have to start over, build the crew back up in the 90s. And what happened was the guys that, Vic Amuso never gives up the crime family. He's leading the crime family today. He's 90 years old and pulling strings from behind bars. But the guys that took over on the street in the 90s had to, for a period of time, they took power away from the Jersey crew to lead themselves. Put in bosses that were from New York that were now responsible for what was going on in New Jersey, and guys like OG guys like Johnny Hooks Capra from the Bronx Harlem crew. We had also a crew down in Florida, Bucky the Boss Caravaggio, were guys that were looking after Jersey Lucchese business from New York. Nicky Scarfo Jr. comes on the scene for a couple years, is given a role of a skipper in some backdoor prison politicking between his dad, Little Nicky, and Little Vic. Just at the end of the day, it was some craziness. Nicky Scarfo, I think, thought that he could use his son to, buy his way back into power in the Philadelphia Mafia in the 2000s. So a little fantastical, if you will. And then Marty Tassetta gets a break, and his state case is overturned, and he's let out of prison in 2005. He's out for 4 years. Some people say he took back his skipper job. And then in 2009, the New Jersey Supreme Court overrules and institutes the initial sentence again, and the conviction is reinstalled. He's got to go back to prison, and we don't hear from him again until the last couple of years, and we'll get to that again in a moment. But things were bumpy and rocky, and they didn't really stabilize again in terms of Jersey being able to regulate itself and govern itself until the late 2000s, when the Pernas then emerge the Trucetta's cousins, the Pernas, Ralphie Perna, Mikey Perna. Um, Mikey Perna had been an acting capo, I think, for a period in the 90s. Ralphie Perna becomes capo in the late 2000s. And then their respective sons, Big Joe and Little Joe, are the guys that are running the show today. But Perna's come on the scene in the late 2000s, about 18 years ago. Ralphie ends up going to prison. Mikey ends up dying. At that point, you got Georgie Neck, who had come out of prison in 14. He was a Brooklyn guy under gas pipe and Vic, but they need, the admin Vic from prison and Big Mike DeSantis, and before him Matty Madonna. They needed a troubleshooter in Jersey, and Georgie Neck got the call, and he went out to the Jersey branch for a couple years, late 2000s, late 2010s, early 2020s, and got the ship righted. And then over the last couple years is being phased into boss mode. But Georgie Neck was the skipper in New Jersey for a while. He tapped Big Joe Perna as his acting when he became when he became a member of the admin. Big Joe Perna took over as official skipper. And remember, that's Michael's son, Ralphie's nephew, Little Joe's first cousin. And we know from court documents that Big Joe was made at Little Joe's house in Toms River. State police had the ceremony under surveillance. Happened in, I think, 2000, some point in the 2000s, 2007, I believe. And Matty Madonna had come in from New York to conduct the ceremony. So that kind of brings us to modern day, and it looks like the Pernas, Big Joe and Little Joe, are guys in their 50s, so they've got a lot more room on the runway, so to speak. I don't see them going anywhere anytime soon. When it comes to Little Joe, we've talked about it on here before. Just has boss material written all over him. Big Joe, as well, as we're learning more recently, Big Joe is more of a low-key figure, not as prevalent, kind of on the scene, popping up in social media pictures like Little Joe. But everybody loves Little Joe. Everybody really respects him and holds him in high regard, gets along with everyone in all the different crime families, maybe almost to his detriment, maybe sometimes in regards to this Merlino stuff. Now, I know there's been some issues with all the crime families in New York, besides the Lucchese's, shunning Joey Merlino, but the Lucchese's themselves have stayed true to Merlino, and a lot of that has to do with his relationship with the Pernas, Pernas and the Lucchese's in New Jersey. We reported, and some of this is coming out in the court filings right now, how they, really saved Philly's ass during the Super Bowl when they had a lot of action. They needed to lay off, and the Genovese, Gambino, Bonanno weren't taking it. So Lucchese took all that action. Marty Trucetta looked like he was going to come out. He had gotten some hearings, some evidentiary hearings. There was a lot of evidence presented that the court acknowledged was prosecutorial misconduct in his conviction back in the 90s. And this goes to the vendetta that we've talked about, that a lot of people allege comes from the government. And, Marty Trucetta is 75, 76 years old, I think. And it looks like he's locked up on a dirty case, even though the case wasn't tossed. The judge said that that the wrongdoing wasn't enough, didn't meet the threshold to toss the whole case or give him a new trial. But the meat and potatoes of it is that there was a dentist appointment that Marty Trucetta was at on June 12th, 1984. It looks like the schedule that the dentist provided to show that Trachetta had an appointment there at the time this murder took place, it looks like it was altered. And if he was at the dentist's office at the time that Jimmy Sinatra is beaten to death, he could not have been taking part in the Jimmy Sinatra homicide, which he was convicted of through that predicate act. And then there appears to have been some other documents that were withheld during the discovery process, which should have gotten over to defense attorneys and appellate attorneys. And then it looks like there might have been some perjury on Phil Leonetti's part. Or if not perjury, there was some discrepancies between Leonetti's debriefings and what he said on the stand in relation to what he had heard about the Jimmy Sinatra murder from Tommy Ricciardi, about whether or not Marty Trachetta was there or wasn't. In the initial debriefings in 89, when Leonetti cut his cooperation deal, he doesn't say anything about Marty Trachetta taking part in that murder. But when he testifies at trial, he says Tommy Ricciardi implicated Marty Trachetta to him. Regardless, it didn't help. It looked like he was going to get a new trial, but he isn't. He's still fighting for freedom. We'll see what happens there. It appears he's gotten a raw deal. Georgie Neck and the Pernas and all these other guys, they're looking at a case right now in Jersey. There could be more charges coming. We got grand juries still convening. So that's where we are right now. I think it's a pretty interesting trip down memory lane and a little history lesson for everybody about where this Jersey crew and the Lucchese's, where they come from, how they got here, and all of the, kind of connect the dots, because it's a really compelling narrative, and I hope everybody enjoyed it. Everybody, please like, share, and subscribe. Original Gangsters Podcast. We're here all day, every week, 24/7, whether here at OG Pod or over at our companion web magazine, The Gangster Report, or over at our Patreon members only. We're here breaking down all the most important, most exclusive breaking news when it comes to the underworld in North America. We love giving you your true crime fix, so keep on tapping in. Scott Burnstein, Original Gangsters Podcast, uncovering the underworld, one city, one region, one country at a time. I'll see you guys next time.